Republican Congressman Ron Paul of Texas, once the Libertarian Party's nominee for president, is the fourth of 5 Republican candidates speaking at our presidential forum here today in Columbia, South Carolina. Let's listen live.
Train of thought going, and again, thanks for coming. The federal government now has a lot of control over education, health care, transportation, energy, banking, our financial institutions. If you were president, what would you begin to downsize, eliminate, redirect to states? What are the programs at the federal level that we need to get out of the federal government?
Well, that's a difficult question because that's a long list. I'd rather you give me the list of one of the things we should keep.
Yeah.
That would be a short list.
Well, let's flip it around then. What should the federal government be doing?
Well, we should have a system of sound money and property rights and contracts. We should have a judicial system. We should have a government and a defense of this country. That was not meant to be for the states, but not a heck of a lot else. We weren't supposed to have 100,000 federal bureaucrats who carry guns. People are supposed to carry the guns, not the bureaucrats. So, no, I think everything should be up for grabs, and it should be grossly reduced. And both parties have added departments endlessly for the last 5, 6, 7 decades. And that's why freedom is not the issue anymore. It's tyranny, it's big government, and we're trying to struggle to hang on to this. But I think we're in a desperate state of affairs because it's slipping by, and with the economy in shambles like we have today, I think we're in much bigger trouble than a lot of people realize.
You mentioned the Federal Reserve, and you and I have worked on the idea of an audit. It's bringing out a few things that we didn't know. They're apparently printing a lot of money, buying our own debt. What is the solution with the Federal Reserve? Do we need to return to a gold standard? You talk a lot about sound money. Exactly what would you do as president?
Well, the president has a limit to what he can do because the Federal Reserve was created by the Congress. It could be restrained by the Congress. It could be eliminated by the Congress. But the most important thing is for the people to understand the business cycle. Who causes the business cycle, and how do we get into recessions and depression? And it has to do with the Federal Reserve. So you can't wave a wand and get Federal Reserve. Even I, who have written about and talked about the Federal Reserve, I don't say close the Federal Reserve down in one day. But I would like to at least see competition. Why can't we legalize the Constitution on money? Competing currency, let gold and silver be used for legal tender. Today, if you use gold and silver, you can go to prison. And the counterfeiters are over there at the Federal Reserve. So we need, and you join me and Steve as well on auditing the Fed is very important. I mean, what we found out, even though we didn't get the audit, we passed it in the House but not in the Senate, but what we got in the audit was that we found out in the bailout, the Fed was involved with $15 trillion passing out to their buddies, 1/3 of it going to foreign banks. I mean, this is such an outrage. It's bigger than the Congress itself. So it has to be reined in. And at certain period of times in our history, Jefferson got rid of a central bank, Jackson got rid of a central bank. And when the issues of money goes before the people, they always vote for sound money because it makes sense to say, why should the politicians be able to spend at will and then just print money when they need it? And then they wonder why we get into trouble. So yes, we have to take the Fed on because it does cause the business cycle. If you want to understand recessions and depression, you have to understand the Federal Reserve System.
Ron, as you know, the president's going to call us all in this Thursday and give us another speech on creating jobs. What would be your jobs plan?
Well, what you need to do is repeal about 70 years of bad economic policy, which isn't all that easy because we follow Keynesian economics, and Keynesian economics teaches that you need to spend more money. No matter how much debt the people are in debt and the government's in debt, they advocate just more spending. So you have to reverse that concept. No, we have to do a lot. We have to repatriate our capital. When you have a weak currency, capital leaves our country. So we've been issuing the Reserve reserve currency of the world, so our dollars go out and buy goods and services, so our jobs go with it. So you have to change that. So it's a monetary issue. But you also have to look at the tax code. You have to, you know, everybody's talking about cutting a little bit on the capital gains. I want to get rid of the capital gains tax and get rid of the income tax, shrink the size of government. Believe me, you would have the jobs then. But of course, it's not going to be easy, because half the people in this country, they sort of like receiving your money, and they're not going to go away easily. But what it's going to lead to is the destruction of our currency and the bankruptcy of the country, and that's going to be much worse than somebody withstanding a cut. But you have to change that. You have to change the regulatory code, the tax code, the monetary system, and really, I believe you have to change the foreign policy, because that's a drain. All great nations fail because they spread themselves too widely around the world, and we've done it as well.
Well, let's take the last minute and just give us your perspective of foreign policy, what needs to be changed.
Well, I would take the advice of the founders, and I would take the advice of George Bush when he ran in the year 2000. No nation building. You know, don't be the policeman of the world. He was highly critical of Clinton. So I would say that we should have a foreign policy of staying out of entangling alliances. I mean, why should we cheer on the entangling alliance of NATO and the United Nations? Here look at the mess we're in Libya today. So I would say we should be out of all those international organizations. We should defend this country, but it would mean bringing our troops home. Let the troops come home and spend their money here. Now, that would be a monetary injection I could support. But no, we're subsidizing the welfare state of Germany by paying for their defense, and Japan as well as South Korea.
Representative King.
Thank you, Ron. I'd like to shift just a little bit and pick up on something I've been anticipating that Jim DeMint would ask, and that would be, I know you're on the record, balanced budget amendment. What conditions would you support in a balanced budget amendment?
Well, I don't want any chance that they would raise taxes to balance the budget. So, and I support the general concept of a balanced budget amendment, but I emphasize the spending side of the equation. That we have to cut the concept of government, the appetite for big government. But, and again, the balanced budget amendment, we should do it. Jefferson wanted to have it. They rejected him. But if you don't deal with the Fed spending more money than we spend, it doesn't accomplish anything. They, spent trillions of dollars more, so we have to deal with that whole concept.
There's going to be a vote on a balanced budget amendment, at least we anticipate, and that balanced budget amendment is not defined in the bill that sets up the super committee. And so there is a balanced budget amendment that's on the calendar of the House that caps it at 18% of GDP, requires a supermajority to waive the balance, to raise taxes, or to, raise taxes or to waive the balance. Would you support a constitutional amendment that put those conditions in it?
Assuming you think that's, a restriction, a good restriction.
Yes.
Yeah, I would lean toward doing that, but I don't think there's enough restrictions on there, because I think there's a fallacy in our GDP. Because, if we rebuild a lot of buildings because we have hurricanes, the GDP goes up. So the GDP is not a good measurement of economic growth. But no, I would certainly, most likely I would support that, but I don't like the GDP approach because it's a deceptive economic term.
Let me, Robert Rector of the Heritage Foundation released a study a year and a half or so ago that identified 72 different means-tested federal welfare programs, 72. And I'm pretty confident no one could list them from memory nor describe how they work. How would you address this welfare state that America has become?
Well, it's going to be difficult unless we change the attitude of the people, because we're living now with a third or fourth generation that have been taught that entitlements are rights. And liberty and rights don't have anything to do with entitlements. Entitlements means that you can take somebody else's money, and the government's there to redistribute it. So you can't do it. You have to do, waste, fraud, and abuse. We have to do whatever we can, but that's not it. It's the philosophy of the entitlement system. But every time, so often when we think about the entitlement, generally we think about, somebody's going to get food stamps. Well, let me tell you, the big entitlements goes to big corporations. That's where the corporation, that's where a lot of the money goes. You have to look at everybody who gets a check. and a lot of corporations get special benefits and checks, so that whole idea of redistribution of wealth has to be challenged. But any program that you can, chisel away at, I think you have to do it. But that's the crisis we face, because we've witnessed it already. Every time you go and make a little cut, some of our state governors try to make cuts, and there's a lot of dissent. A lot of people get very angry over it, and we have to be prepared for that, because the financial crisis is going to get a lot worse. By next summer, the big tax is coming, and that's going to be the inflation tax, because we have fallen back on this idea that we can spend and print money, and the devaluation of our currency every single day is being devalued sharply. And if you look at its relationship to gold, you realize how big of the trouble is that we're facing.
I just concede to your points on currency and the Fed.
The Texas Republican Congressman Ron Paul speaking there. Consistent and controversial, his views on dramatically shrinking the size and the responsibilities of the federal government. Our special coverage of this Republican presidential forum in Columbia, South Carolina continues after this quick break.